Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Navigating Alzheimer's, Unraveling Diagnoses, Challenges, and Finding Solutions, presented by Home Instead and hosted by the American Society on Aging. We'll begin shortly, but first let's cover a few important notes. We appreciate your patience as we launch our new platform and work through any initial kinks. Our aim is to provide an enhanced and streamlined experience. And on a personal note, I know that some of you may have emailed me while I was out of office on vacation. I'm still working through those emails, so don't worry. Any issues that you have, we will be resolving them for you. The certificate application will be accessible immediately after today's webinar on the tab above the presentation screen. Both the application and quiz must be completed for all certificate types, including certificate of attendance. Note that in your application, membership to a credit reporting organization is your accreditation board, and membership number is your license number. If you do not select a credit reporting organization, no certificate will be generated. The on-demand recording for today's webinar will be available within 48 hours in your classroom. To comply with board requirements, there will be checkpoints during the webinar to ensure active participation, so please be prepared to respond to those as they occur. For more information on key changes, please review the FAQs document linked in the Announcements tab right below this window or on our webinars page and in your emails. Emails are the best way for us to communicate important updates with you, so please do take the time to read your confirmation and reminder emails. If you know, I know you have many other things that require your time and attention, but as we launch our new system, it's important to just pay a little bit closer attention to those. Presentation slides are in the Materials tab and will not be included in follow-up emails, so feel free to download them now, or you can access them in your classroom later. Please ensure that you are logged into the webinar with the email address you registered with, or we have no way of tracking your attendance. Your time is logged and full viewing is required for certificate eligibility. You have 60 days from today to complete an application. And for any technical issues, please use the helpline available under the Help tab at the top of your screen. For questions about today's presentation, please use the Q&A tab below this window. We'll do our best to address these in the last few minutes of today's programming. And now I would like to introduce today's presenters, Lakeland Eichenberger, a gerontologist and caregiving advocate at Home Instead with a doctorate from the University of Nebraska. Lakeland is a renowned speaker and expert in elder care. And Jenny Monroe, a gerontologist and response team manager for Home Instead's global headquarters, leading the Home Instead response team in helping family caregivers navigate the complexities of the elder care continuum. She is a certified Alzheimer's journey coordinator through Camden College. We are so excited to have you both here with us today.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining Jenny and I, and I'm excited to have Jenny join me today. As a fellow gerontologist, it's always good to talk about anything aging related with a fellow gerontologist, but Jenny also has a personal connection to Alzheimer's, which I know that she will share as she goes through her portion of the presentation. So thank you all again for being here. This is an important topic, and it's timely because June is designated as Alzheimer's and Brain Health Awareness Month. The Alzheimer's Association, I know, recognizes this month. There's a lot of purple that's being worn. The longest day is the summer solstice, June 20th, where they have a fundraising event where they kind of shine a light on Alzheimer's and other dementias. So we thought, let's focus this month on the topic of Alzheimer's, and let's talk about the challenges around diagnosis and some of the solutions. A lot of the families I talk with, they have a lot of challenges when it comes to getting their loved one diagnosed, whether it's making an appointment and actually getting in to see a provider, or overcoming kind of the stigma or the resistance of their loved one to getting a diagnosis, or maybe there's some denial involved. So we're going to talk more about all of this in today's presentation. And of course, here's our pictures. You can also see our faces on video now, which is fun. And we're just, again, delighted to be here with you today. And thank you for your time to learn more about this topic. So here are our objectives for today. We're going to go over those 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's disease and talk about the importance of diagnosis. I think when you speak to family caregivers, if you work directly with them, a lot of them will say, I actually saw the signs, but maybe I ignored them or I kind of brushed them off, and I wish I would have done something about them sooner. So we're going to talk about those 10 warning signs so that we can educate those that we work with on those signs to point them to diagnosis. We're also going to talk about the challenges of early detection and planning. We'll talk about some communication strategies and care tips as well, because we know that the way Alzheimer's and other dementias impacts the brain, often it impacts a person's ability to communicate or express themselves. And that's where a lot of tension and frustration can come about between family members because they're just having issues communicating with their loved one. And then we'll leave you with some resources to support you and the families that you work with. So let's jump into those warning signs and the importance of diagnosis. And when we think about Alzheimer's disease and the various risk factors, we know that age is the greatest risk factor for Alzheimer's. As we get older, our risk increases. But we know also that this is not just a disease of old age. We see people under the age of 65 being diagnosed with earlier onset Alzheimer's or other types of dementias. And later in the year, we're doing an entire presentation on the other dementias. We know that Alzheimer's disease gets a lot of the spotlight because it's the most common. Anywhere from 60 to 80% of all cases of dementia tend to be Alzheimer's in nature. So, but there are other forms of dementia like FTD, frontal temporal dementia, Lewy body dementia, vascular mixed dementia. So later in the year, we're going to do an entire presentation on the other types of dementia. So I hope you'll sign up for that event too. But it can be kind of confusing for families. What is dementia versus Alzheimer's? And dementia is more of that umbrella term. So you can see that graphic there on the bottom, that umbrella. Dementia really is a decline in our mental ability that's severe enough to impact our daily life. And there are many types of dementia. There are some that are, of course, well known, like the ones listed on the screen: vascular, Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body, frontal temporal dementia, mixed dementia. But there are other types of dementia as well. And that's why it helps to get a diagnosis, to try to figure out, okay, what type of dementia does my loved one or the person I'm caring for have, because that might help you better educate yourself on that type of dementia, the dementia-related behaviors that are associated with it, the best ways to care for individuals with those specific types of dementia-related behaviors. So again, it's important to kind of understand that dementia is that umbrella term, and then a person likely has a type of dementia. But we know that it's not a normal part of aging. There's kind of that misconception out there that, if I get older, I'm bound to have a type of dementia. Well, that's not the case. And actually, we're learning there's a lot we can do for our brain health to reduce our risk of dementia. And we can start those kind of brain healthy activities as early as our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. If we can do brain healthy activities throughout our life course, it can help reduce our risk. But again, Alzheimer's disease is that most common type of dementia, and it develops due to those microscopic changes in the brain over time. You can see in the bottom right hand of the slide the healthy cells in the brain, those healthy neurons, versus a brain with Alzheimer's disease. And you can see plaques and tangles, the amyloid plaques, the tau tangles that develop in the brain that really kind of cut off those neurons from being able to talk to one another. And so then we have cell death that causes damage to the brain. And sometimes that can also be helpful to help families understand, is that, if your loved one is experiencing behavioral changes or mood changes, and they have a diagnosis of dementia, they're not trying to do that on purpose. They're not trying to be difficult on purpose. So they're not purposefully, trying to act in a certain way. Really, the brain is changing. There is damage to the brain, and it's because of that damage, it's causing them to exhibit those dementia-related behaviors. And so sometimes it's hard for family members to come to terms with that. It's really hard to watch a loved one progress through the disease, and we'll talk a little bit more about how Alzheimer's progresses. But it is important to understand that a lot of times it is the disease. It's not necessarily the person. So hopefully that's helpful to kind of lay a groundwork of what is dementia versus Alzheimer's. So we have the 10 signs of Alzheimer's disease, and this is put out by the Alzheimer's Association. And these 10 signs, if a person exhibits just one of them, of course we want to pay attention. But if it's kind of just a one-off, one-time thing, it might not be as concerning. Rather, we're kind of looking for patterns. We're looking for kind of multiple signs. We're looking for these signs happening over a period of time. A lot of times, if a person has kind of an overnight change in their cognition or mental ability, it might be due to something like a urinary tract infection, a UTI, that might be causing that kind of sudden onset of cognitive changes. But if it's something that you're seeing patterns over a period of time, it's important to go to a provider to seek, diagnosis, or to just really to get to the underlying issue. So our 10 signs includes that memory loss that disrupts daily life. It's one thing to be forgetful every so often, but if it's starting to impact a person's ability to care for themselves or to get where they need to go, then again, it's cause for concern. We need to look into it. Challenges in planning or problem solving. Sometimes you see this in individuals that maybe have that younger onset that are still working. Maybe activities at work that involve those problem solving, those planning activities, those become more and more challenging. Also, we have difficulty completing familiar tasks, listed as number 3. And that, think about, a family member that maybe has always been a good cook, always cooked, from memory, the same recipes year over year, but all of a sudden they're starting to taste different, or they can't quite follow that recipe anymore. They're really having difficulty with those familiar tasks. Next is confusion with time or place. If you've seen the movie Still Alice, there is a scene in that movie where she's gone on the same jogging route in her community, probably daily for many, many years. And all of a sudden, she finds herself lost on that route. And so if your loved one ever experiences something like that, maybe when they're driving to and from a familiar place, that is a sign that we don't want to ignore. And then also trouble understanding visual images or spatial relations. This might start to impact the person's balance. They might have trouble, reading, might have trouble with driving, understanding what the signs and the traffic indicators are and what they mean. So again, those are things we don't want to ignore. And then as we move through the rest of those signs, any problems with words in speaking or writing, if you find themselves searching for words or substituting them for another word, or even kind of describing, that thing that we use for that one thing, those kinds of ways of describing an item without being able to kind of label it, that might be cause for concern as well. One of those signs we need to pay attention to. Misplacing things or losing the ability to retrace steps, kind of the classic keys in the freezer example. If a person, was always great about, keeping track of their billfold or their wallet or their keys, and all of a sudden they're misplacing those items, and most importantly, that they're not able to retrace their steps to find those items. That's when it's cause for concern. Because I know we've all lost our keys, but usually we can think, okay, well, I got back from the grocery store at about 10 a.m. and I brought in all the groceries. Maybe I left the keys in the car, or maybe the keys fell off the counter into the drawer when I was putting the groceries away. But someone with Alzheimer's or another type of dementia, they might not be able to retrace those steps. We also see decreased or poor judgment. A lot of times we see that show up in financials. I actually just came across an article recently that there are kind of signs in a person's financial activities that could be an early indicator of Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. Or if they suddenly start giving to every single charity that sends them a piece of mail, something of that sort, a change in that judgment could be another sign. Also, withdrawing from work or social activities. This can be an indicator. The person themselves might be starting to realize that their cognition is changing and it's embarrassing. Or maybe the social or work environment, all of the activity is overstimulating. So they start to withdraw from those activities. And then also changes in mood or personality. If somebody was always, pretty pleasant, happy-go-lucky or pretty laid back, and all of a sudden they become very easily agitated or upset, those are things to keep track of. And as a family member or a loved one, you might want to kind of journal some of these patterns or keep track of them, because when you do go for a diagnosis, the medical provider is going to be asking a lot of questions. When did you see this start to occur? How often does it occur? Those kinds of things. So, keeping track of some of those patterns can be really, really helpful. And we know that early detection and diagnosis is so, so important because, as I mentioned earlier, there might be something else going on. And it's important to be able to rule out, something that could be causing these cognitive issues, like a UTI, or maybe there's a vitamin deficiency, or maybe they recently started a new medication and unknowingly it's negatively interacting with another med that they have been taking. And so it's causing some cognitive issues. And so it's important to go for a diagnosis in case there really is no diagnosis. There's some other condition that is responsible for that cognitive impairment. Early detection and planning also allows us to get on top of the legal, financial, and care options when it comes to kind of that planning part. We know, again, that Alzheimer's or another type of dementia, it's a progressive disease. And so over time, a person's usually going to lose their ability to make decisions on their own behalf or to care for themselves. So you want to involve them in important discussions early on to make sure that the voice of that person will be heard, make sure that their wishes are known to the care team, to the family. And this actually can help to reduce feelings of guilt or that ambiguity, those feelings of we don't know what's going on, or we don't know what mom or dad wants. It can also help with kind of the emotions that everyone is experiencing. If as a family member, if you have the opportunity to sit down with your loved one early enough and say, okay, what is important to you? What are your wishes? If we had, best case scenario, plan A, what would that be? Okay, if we can't make plan A work, what would plan B look like? What would plan C look like? And then down the road, if you have to execute on any of those plans, a lot of times there's more peace of mind from the family's perspective, knowing, okay, we've had this conversation with mom or dad. We're making decisions that we know they would approve of because we've been able to talk about this. It also can give the opportunity to seek out a specialist, maybe participate in a clinical trial. We know there's a lot of exciting research happening in Alzheimer's treatments and detection. And so we know that, the first person, hopefully someday, to be cured of Alzheimer's will be in a clinical trial. So it gives the person an opportunity to engage in those types of things. And then also we know that there is an economic benefit of planning ahead. We know not only will it kind of it can go a long way in preventing a person from having to move to a care community or a nursing home, maybe delay that for a few years, which could be an economic saving for the families. And so that is another reason why we need to have these discussions to make sure that all of the planning is able to happen. But while this sounds great and ideal that everyone would seek diagnosis, everyone would plan ahead, we know reality is not so. There are challenges of this early detection and planning, and a lot of times families are waiting until the signs are, too prevalent to ignore. The reality is, okay, there is something wrong. We need to address it now. And sometimes it's in crisis mode because there has been a fall or an car accident because their driving has been impaired, or maybe they wandered and have put themselves in danger. So again, the best case scenario is to plan ahead, but let's talk about why some of these challenges exist. Well, if we look at it kind of from people's different perspectives, if we look at it from the person living with the cognitive issues, one, they might lack an awareness that they even have memory issues. Some individuals will start to kind of realize that they're having impairments in their cognition, but others, they might not realize it. And so that can be challenging when you as a family member or professional are saying, we're seeing changes, we're noticing changes, we really think you should get a diagnosis, and they feel like nothing has changed. That can be a challenge. There's also a fear of the unknown. A lot of people have said that, there's no cure, there's no significant treatment, so we don't know what this disease will look like for me. There's that negative stigma that it's a death sentence, and so there's a lot of fear associated with it, and so that might be prohibiting them from a diagnosis, especially if they're starting to kind of clue into some of that cognitive decline, and they're realizing that some of their independence is slipping away from them and their memories. It can be scary, and they might also be in denial of the issue as well. And again, it might prevent them from being honest with their healthcare provider about some of the cognitive challenges that they are having. And so the healthcare provider might not be able to get an accurate depiction of what's really going on. And that's why the care partner, the caregiver, the family member, they can be a great ally for the healthcare provider in terms of sharing what they are observing as it relates to their cognition. Then when we look at it from the healthcare provider's perspective, we are seeing that, it can be challenging for family members to get a diagnosis from their healthcare provider. Maybe they're in a more rural area and there's a limited number of providers. Maybe those providers aren't, they don't know about the latest kind of diagnostic options, or they are hesitant to make a diagnosis because there's limited treatment options and there is no cure. If you think about our healthcare system and how physicians are trained in the United States, at least, they want to cure. They learn about a disease or a condition, and then they learn how to cure it or fix it. And so, for Alzheimer's or another type of dementia, we know that there is an inevitable decline, and so they might feel hesitant to make that diagnosis. But organizations like the Alzheimer's Association, they're doing really great advocacy work to educate healthcare providers, to provide them with diagnostic tools to help even general practitioners, family doctors be able to better diagnose. They also, they might also be hesitant because they know that this will be a stressful diagnosis for families, and there's often a lack of community supports and resources that the healthcare providers feel like they can point individuals to. So again, a lot of education is being done to connect families with organizations like the Alzheimer's Association and others to get them connected to those community resources and supports. And then also we know that when it comes to specialists, geriatric physicians, neurologists, people that do specialize in these kind of cognitive conditions, they are limited in our society. We need more geriatricians, we need more neurologists because the need is growing. And so, I spoke with a family recently to get in to see a neurologist, it was a 6 to 7 month wait. That's how long it was going to take to get in to see the neurologist for more of that formal diagnosis. And if you've ever cared for someone living with Alzheimer's or dementia, you know that a lot can happen in 6 months. There can be a lot of decline. And so, it broke my heart to hear that. And so getting individuals connected to their healthcare provider as soon as possible, to get in to see specialists as soon as possible is so, so important. Again, there's that stigma. We've already talked a little bit about that. That's associated with dementia that can prevent people from seeking a diagnosis. And then sometimes family members themselves are in denial, or they are reluctant because they don't want to admit that their loved one is having issues and challenges. And so they might, not feel the urgency to get a diagnosis because of kind of their fears associated with it. In one of the Alzheimer's Association does a great facts and figures report every year, and in one of their recent reports, they talked about these challenges of diagnosis, and 30% of people said they would not talk to a relative about the troubling signs of dementia, even if they were worried. And that's concerning because we want families to be talking about cognition. And I think it's healthy to normalize it, talk about, I know there's a kind of a phrase, a checkup from the neck up. We get an annual physical, many of us, but is your healthcare provider talking about your cognitive health, your mental wellness? 76% rather would be concerned about offending a family member if they brought it up. And it is a very sensitive topic. 69% are concerned with ruining their relationship with the person if they bring this up. And 38% would wait until the symptoms got worse to talk about it. And those are hard statistics to read, but I get it. I understand why family members would be hesitant to talk about this. But again, if we can get them to understand the benefits of early detection and diagnosis, that hopefully can help with some of these challenges that we've been talking about. But it really does have to start with some sort of conversation, and that can be really hard. So some tips on how to have this conversation. As I mentioned, keeping some sort of journal or tracking the patterns maybe in your cell phone in a note section. But knowing the signs, being able to kind of recognize them and looking for those patterns can be really helpful. Also, not delaying the conversation, taking some time to think about how you want to approach the conversation, picking the right time and place, compassionately explaining your concerns, but also making it a dialogue. I recently had a family friend, she's noticing signs in her dad of cognitive impairment, and she knows that they need a diagnosis, but he is so resistant to going to the doctor. And so one of the things that I encouraged was, make it a dialogue. Talk about your own brain health. Make it a conversation. Ask them, have you noticed any changes in yourself? You can even kind of use examples of other families. I know I have a family friend who went through this with their parent. I was thinking about my own cognitive health. What are your thoughts about that? Have you noticed any changes? Those kinds of things. Another set of tips for this conversation is involving the healthcare provider or an outside family member, maybe a social worker. Sometimes a third party can be more effective in having the conversation because they can kind of remove the emotion. Also, I often tell family members, because of HIPAA laws, your parent or loved one, their healthcare provider can't share any health information with you. But you can call maybe ahead of their upcoming appointment and say, I'm the daughter of Mr. Smith, and we are noticing some cognitive changes. We know he has an upcoming appointment. We'd appreciate it if the doctor would address his cognition and his cognitive changes with him. And so anyone over the age of 65, they're on Medicare, the Medicare annual wellness exam, you now can incorporate a cognitive screen. So it doesn't cost any extra to add that on to that appointment. So again, seeking that third party can be helpful. And then creating a positive plan of action. Talking about going to see the healthcare provider, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go with you. We're going to ask some questions. And then after the fact, if there is a diagnosis, continuing to incorporate that individual in the plan to talk through kind of next steps can help them feel like, they have some agency or control over the situation. Again, reaching out for professionals for help. And then finally, don't be discouraged if you attempt the conversation once and it doesn't go well. It might take time. It might take several conversations, or it might take teeing up the conversation one and saying, hey, I'd really like to talk to you soon about your health. Can we pick a time so that the person's not caught off guard? And don't give up on the conversation if you are met with some resistance. So when it comes to getting the diagnosis, I mentioned that screening is part of that annual wellness visit for Medicare. When there are symptoms that you bring up to a healthcare provider, just be prepared to discuss, what kinds of symptoms you're noticing, when they began, how often do they happen, have they gotten worse, those kinds of things. Just become prepared to answer those questions, and it'll help make the appointment hopefully go more smoothly. There also might be a possible referral to a specialist. And as they kind of work through the diagnostic process, they're going to go through the medical history. There's probably going to be a physical exam, some diagnostic testing, neurological exam, a mental status test. In some cases, there might even be brain imaging. What's really exciting is there are some kind of, blood and biomarker testing that is in kind of the research pipeline that are showing some promising results in being able to diagnose or kind of help with the diagnosis process. So I think in the coming years, we're going to see some great strides in diagnosing this disease. And so I continue to follow organizations like the Alzheimer's Association to stay up to date on those advances in research. So now that we've talked a little bit about kind of the diagnostic process, I'm going to pass it over to Jenny, and she's going to talk about the stages of Alzheimer's disease. Because we know that often, if a diagnosis happens, families are left wondering, okay, now what can I expect? So I'll pass it to Jenny.
Thanks, Lakeland. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay,
awesome. We had a little test earlier. I wasn't quite sure, so thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for attending and being here. As Lakeland mentioned earlier, that Alzheimer's is a progressive disease, which means it worsens over time. And you'll hear of Alzheimer's described in 3 general stages. The first stage being the early stage, and the person is still really able to function independently for the most part in the early stages. They may need some extra reminders or verbal or nonverbal cues, but in talking to those who are living with dementia in the early stage, they're often told, well, you don't look like you have dementia, or sometimes you don't act like you have dementia. However, the family and that individual living with dementia are likely to notice changes, but it's not as noticeable to others that they may frequent in their neighborhood or their church or community. The middle stage is when you really do start to see more noticeable changes in behavior. And I really feel this is the longest stage, at least it was my experience to be the longest stage for my mother who lived with Alzheimer's for over 13 years. The individual in the middle stages really needs to have more assistance in their daily routines and their activities of daily living and their needs. And in this stage, we also see more issues and challenges with communication. The person living with dementia or Alzheimer's may have trouble following a conversation. It may also take them longer to process and respond to a conversation or to a question. This person also may start to lose their ability to recall names of people and items. And I know in this stage too, from my own personal experience, I'm the youngest of 9 children. So in early stages, I would say my mom would call us, there's 6 girls in our family, which, call us all something but our own name. And so that continued and progressed as she lived in that middle stages of Alzheimer's. And then in the late stages, the person will really experience more decline in their physical health. They'll likely lose the ability to walk and sometimes become bedridden. They can also likely have difficulty eating and swallowing and expressing themselves verbally. I know in the late stages for my mother, she did become bedridden. She wasn't able to walk and there was no communication verbally at all. It was really through the eyes and, communicating with her that way versus verbally. In the late stages too, as the PowerPoint here mentions, the difficulty to eating, swallowing, and the ability to communicate is very limited, if any, in the late stages. So what to expect? We'll go over each one of these, but what to expect during this process is a change in communication, a change in personality and behavior, a change in how one feels. There's also expectations, health-related issues, and problems in the environment, which we can address as well. Communication strategies and care tips. So as Lakeland had mentioned also, Alzheimer's disease eventually impacts the person's ability to communicate. It can be really helpful to learn about ways that you can improve communication with the person you're caring for, along with care tips for caregivers and care partners. Communication challenges caused by dementia. Now, as we have been aware of, dementia causes some people to get confused about language. For example, the person might forget or no longer understand English if it was learned as a second language. Instead, he or she might understand and use only the first language learned, such as Spanish. Other communication problems could include trouble remembering steps in common activities. Lakeland had mentioned about recipes and following a simple recipe that my mom used to make cinnamon rolls over every holiday, or she was a cook and made many dishes, and as the disease progressed, we noticed that things have started to taste different, or she wasn't able to make the same meals like she used to. She couldn't execute them. So just activities like cooking a meal, paying bills can be difficult. Getting dressed or doing laundry and making sure there's actually detergent in the laundry and making sure that they're doing step-by-step things can be getting more difficult and confused by those individuals living with dementia. Problems understanding meaning of words, often losing the train of thought when you're talking. And you really have to start to be patient with those individuals when you start communicating with them, because their frustration level will increase. So that individual can experience frustration if communication isn't working. They may demonstrate a dementia-related behavior as a way to try and communicate unmet needs. Some personality and behavior changes. You also may notice that a person stops caring about how he or she looks. They may stop taking baths and showers, and they want to wear the same clothes every day. We still, with my mom and her her behaviors have changed with her clothes. We ended up just keeping her wardrobe very simple, and we ended up buying the same pair of slacks. We bought like 3 or 4 pairs, so she would think that she was wearing, the same pants and slacks and tops, and just wash them. She didn't care about showering and bathing. That was a very difficult task for her. Sometimes she would, cry about bath time, and because she didn't like to have to get in the shower and be bathed. So those conversations have to be done, and we had to be a little more stern with her when it was time to, take a shower and start to bathe and wash her hair. She would get really frustrated, and her personality really would change when it would become time to take a bath and to take a shower. Some other personality and behavior changes are hiding objects or believing someone is stealing things. We speak to a lot of individuals over the phone here at Homestead where, that is a behavior that happens frequently, where mom, is hiding someone's glasses in the home, or they think someone is stealing from them when actually they put them in a drawer and forgot that they left them in there. Some other behavior changes are swearing and making inappropriate gestures or comments, whether it's to your own family or when you're in public. So those are some other behaviors that, you need to be aware of and learn how to handle them as they come. Wandering and walking about more often and wandering away from the home, that's when it becomes really serious, and you do need to take attention and be aware of what you can do as a family to make sure that there is someone always with your individual living with dementia, or make sure the doors are locked and the keys are put away so they don't wander outside of the home at any time. And then there could be also frustration that may lead to physical outbursts, hitting or biting. Fortunately, we didn't encounter that type of behavior with my mother, but I have spoken to families where there have been physical outbursts, throwing items, and that's really, again, comes down to the brain change. It's not the person or the individual. It's the what's happening to the brain and the disease that it is bringing upon those behavior changes. Okay, next slide. Now, in addition to the changes in the brain, the following things may also affect how people with Alzheimer's disease, how they behave. So some changes, it's important to stay in tune into how the person is feeling. With this change, sometimes like in the middle stages, they do know that there is change happening, and they can become overwhelmed and sad and fearful. They become stressed about something or someone maybe in their environment because maybe they're not as patient as someone else in the family. So that stress could be caused by someone in the family or a friend. There's also confusion after a change in routine. Sometimes families have to, change a routine in the home for the safety of that individual. So if the individual living with dementia gets confused, that anger and stress and anxiety can come out. There's also frustration about losing their ability to do certain things in memory. I know with my mom, in her case, she was an avid bridge player. And when her disease progressed further into the late stages, she had to withdraw on her group of friends because she didn't feel she could keep up with the game and the conversations that were being had during the game. So I know that brought her a lot of sadness because not only did she lose a social aspect of being with her friends, she also lost that the game of bridge and keeping sharp and being able to follow the game and being a good partner to her friends during that game. Also, give me one sec here. Yeah. So health-related issues. Really, it's very important that you keep your regular healthcare visits and consider scheduling the best time of the day for that individual. Maybe they are sleeping more and they're not getting up until 9 or 10 o'clock, and it takes an hour to get up and get dressed and get out. So maybe it's better to schedule visits where they are sharper during the day and feel better rested, and they just ate, and going to the doctor or keeping their dentist appointments or their, any type of regular healthcare visits. Try to consider the best time of the day for that individual. Another great reminder too is to maintain a current list of meds and pay attention to the side effects of any new medications that your loved one might be on. It's again, in keeping that journal about the changes and dating those changes. Again, do that with your meds, because sometimes I've spoken to family members where their parent has been on 15 plus different medications. They have no idea when they started them. They lost track of the side effects. So, do yourself a favor and do your best to keep track and maintain a list of medications, when they started them, and if there are any side effects. Some other health-related issues is a person may have issues with sleeping. Okay, they may start waking up and wandering. Sundowners, some of you may have heard of before, where an individual wakes up in the middle of the night and starts wandering. Really set up that individual for success with sleep, kind of like you may have done if you have children. Used to be a process when I had my son when he was little. Consider those same steps with your adult parent or loved one that has dementia. Is get into a routine where they start winding down. Maybe they enjoy a hot bath. Maybe they enjoy, a hot cup of tea before they go to bed, or turn off all the electronics, listen to some soothing music. Create an environment that is conducive to sleep, where there's not a lot of light, but yet maybe have some lights. We used to have the night lights for my mom's room when she got up and she moved. They were motion lights, so they were off most of the time, but if she did get up and that night light was on, she would be able to see. Another important health issue is to make sure that your loved one is on a good diet, healthy, eating nutrition with lots of fruits and vegetables and fiber, as well as staying hydrated. I know sometimes people get the UTIs. They're not drinking a lot because they're afraid of incontinence and having accidents, but it's so important to stay hydrated and drink that water and make sure that their nutrition is in place as well. And also pay attention to any changes in their senses. Dementia can impact your eyesight. You have vision checks regularly, and also have your hearing checked regularly. Those are all really important things. Again, as mentioned on the number one bullet here, is to really keep those healthcare visits and make sure that you're doing them on an annual basis and doing them at a time where it's really good for your loved one or individual that is living with dementia. There's also problems in the environment that we can pay special attention to. One thing too, as I said, is, set up the individual for success. And in the home, I think what's so important is removing any type of clutter in the home to avoid any falls. Just make sure there's always a clear path for individuals in the home, and removing clutter and ensuring that there's proper lighting. Usually in the living room, the family room, if they have shades, make sure there's plenty of light so that they can see and not fall over any clutter that might be in the room. When it comes to your bathroom, having safety features such as grab bars by the toilet, in the shower, having a bath chair, preventing anything from a fall. Where you can put into your bathroom, get rid of any type of rugs that they may trip on, really sets up that individual for success. Also, another one that really impacted my mother a lot was noise and commotion. Really caused her for confusion and frustration. As I mentioned earlier, we have a family of 9 kids. Then you take, everybody is married, everybody has kids. So we have a really large family. And one thing that was really hard for us to do is really limit the amount of people at my mom's house. So when, holidays came or birthdays, we really had to go in shifts, because if there were too many people in a room with my mom, she would literally put her hands to her head and close her eyes. She would get very confused. the loud noise, the talking really agitated her. So it's really might be a good idea to really limit the amount of people and the noise, because that really can be a trigger for those individuals living with dementia. Being in a place that she didn't know about, we caused her confusion as well. So again, going back to the visits with my mom and her, I would say late middle stages and late stages, well, really middle stages, we really kept the visits to her house. We would go to her versus her coming to us, and coming into a different environment really confused her. And where am I at? Whose house is this? Why aren't I at home? You know, where's your dad? Those type of questions and confusion really seemed to accelerate when we would take her to another sibling's house. So those visits changed where we began to come to her. Let's see here. And then even some may think that a mirror image is another person in the room. So I don't have a lot of experience with that, but I have spoken to people that have taken mirrors down, because that even confuses those individuals living with dementia. So anything to, prevent frustration, anxiety in the environment is definitely a way to set up that person for success. Okay, so some tips on communication. I think these are great, really great tips. The first one, and I think the most important, is to make eye contact and make sure that you're talking to the person and using their name. Make sure they know that you're talking with them. And that would be sitting right across from them, not standing up and them sitting down. Sit down right in front of them and make that eye contact and call them by their first name. I think that's extremely important when it comes to communicating with those individuals living with dementia or Alzheimer's. Another tip too is always approach that individual from the front. You never want to alert them or startle them and tap them on the back and startle them or scare them for that much. Approach that individual from the front to avoid alarming them. Be aware of your tone and how loud your voice is. How you look at that person and your body language really do make a difference. Your body language can communicate more than we realize. For example, crossing your hands, rolling your eyes, putting your hands on your hips. Those are all really negative body language. Instead, really, again, use that eye contact and sit across from that individual. I used to hold my mom's hand during that time or rub her shoulder, really encourage that you do those types of tips when it comes to communicating with the individual, and also allowing time for that person to respond. So if you're having a conversation and you ask them, how is your day going? And, it takes them a while. Give them 8 to 10 seconds to respond, and know that it is going to be a delayed response, and it's okay to help them after a while. But use some nonverbals to help clarify communication as well. When I mentioned earlier about simplifying questions over time, complex questions can be too challenging. Make sure to ask one thing at a time. An example might be if you're at your parents' for lunch and just say, Mom, what do you want for lunch? Change that question to, Mom, would you like some soup or a sandwich today? If she says a sandwich, great. I have ham or turkey. Which one would you like? Is really narrowing it down and simplifying those questions. I'll never forget it. One time we took my mom out to a restaurant and we got this menu, and my gosh, it was like 5 pages long, and she was just dumbfounded by it. She just looked at it. You know what? We took the menu out and I said, Mom, do you want a hamburger or do you want a Reuben? It used to be her favorite sandwich. That way it was just this or that. And I was simplifying her choices. Do you want French fries or do you want a salad? So really do yourself a favor and simplify those questions. And then again, as I said, allow enough time for that person to respond. Give them 8 to 10 seconds. They may need more time to process and formulate their response. And lastly, consider using some nonverbals to help clarify communication. You may need to show that person in addition to telling them. Okay. And then encourage the communication. The first step to understand Alzheimer's and dementia is to understand the disease and that the causes will change in these skills. Another second step is to try some tips that may make communication easier. For example, eye contact gets a person's attention, calling them by name. We talked a little bit about body language is the message you send by the way you hold your body, the way you hold your hands and fold your arms. Be patient with any angry outbursts that may come up. Remember, it's the disease talking, it's not that individual. And I love this last one. If you become frustrated, because you probably will, I know I have. I took a time out myself. Mom, I'll be right back. I need to get something, or I need to get a glass of water, and just take a moment for yourself, because the last thing you want to do is become frustrated in front of that person. Let's see here. Yeah. Oh, hi, Lakeland.
Hi. I know we're running out of time.
Okay.
So much great information to cover.
Yes.
I love all of the examples that you are sharing, Jenny, and I think your firsthand account of caring for your mom and just those lessons learned are so important. And I love this quote by Maya Angelou. People will forget what you said, will forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And so I think as we work with individuals living with dementia, those are things. This quote we can keep in mind. We don't have to get it right every time, as long as we, approach with empathy and compassion and try to make them feel, confident and work on, a loving and supporting environment and attitude. And then we had some care tips. I think that Jenny has gone through most of these already. So we'll let you, again, the presentation slides are available. And then we always throw in self-care for caregivers. I know sometimes it can sound a little, it's talked about a lot, but it is so important, especially Alzheimer's and dementia care. We know from a research standpoint that there's more burnout and stress and strain. And so caregivers really do need to take care of themselves so that they can continue on in their role. And then before we go on to resources, Jenny, any last thoughts from you on this topic as it relates to diagnosis or kind of working through those challenges?
I would say just educate yourself and be patient. And I think those are the two most important things that I did and my family did, is learn about the disease. ALZ.org, best site ever. Be patient with those individuals living with the disease, and also ask for help. I always said, my mom was 90 years old and weighed 100 pounds, and it took a village, from hospice to home instead to 9 children and their spouses, to take care of one individual, because it does wear on you. It is hard work, but it is rewarding. But ask for help, and that is important.
Such great tips and words of advice. And I do have ALZ.org on my next slide, but I think it's also important. There is so much stigma around the disease that we also wanted to point you all to some resources for people that are living well with dementia. So there are support groups specific to the individual with the diagnosis. A few years back, I did a great live chat with Reverend Cynthia Hewling Hummel on, she has dementia, she's living with dementia, but how she's living well. So I think connecting those individuals to resources as well is important. So of course, the Alzheimer's Association's website's on there, some of the other dementia-related associations, there's resources, there are support groups to get connected with. There are books like The Best Friends Approach, and there are like online Facebook communities that families can get plugged into so that they know that they're not alone. I think that is so powerful when you're able to connect family caregivers to others that are going through similar things, because this is a journey. Often family caregivers are caring for an individual for many years. And so it's not a sprint, it's more of a marathon. So connecting to others going through it can, again, be so, so powerful. So I know that we're coming to the end of our time, and I wish we could talk about this for, another hour. There's so much great info, but I want to thank Jenny for joining me, and thank Victoria and ASA for hosting a great webinar. And on this last slide is my email address and Jenny's email address. I know there were so many great questions coming in that we didn't get to today, so we apologize for that, but you can always reach out to us anytime. So Victoria, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much. And yes, we did have, there was two main questions. So if you just have one moment, this question seemed to be coming up a lot regarding kind of expanding on how to get someone to the doctor, especially, in the early stages, if that kind of kind voice is not being heard. Can you expand on that just a little bit? What are some other strategies?
Yeah, I think that is it's really tough. So, usually everyone has some sort of annual physical. So if you can get them to go in for that annual physical and call ahead to the doctor, you could even, call into the doctor and see if there's a way to, I don't want to say like deceive them into coming back in, but is there something that the doctor could ask them to come in for as a follow-up to maybe that annual exam that was a few months ago, so that they can kind of be reevaluated? That might be one approach. Sometimes in like a spousal situation, the spouse that is not experiencing the cognitive impairment, they might say, well, hey, I really want to I want to go for this cognitive screen myself. Would you go with me and do one too? That could be a way to make it more approachable and not like it's just focused on them as an individual. And so that could be a way to kind of open them up for the discussion. I think sometimes, going in with your journal of, well, I've noticed this and that about your cognition, that might not be the best approach. But you might need to approach it a couple different times, a couple different ways. And you might consider who is approaching. In my family, my youngest sister, for whatever reason, can bring up really tough topics with my parents, whereas some of the rest of us, we don't feel as comfortable. We don't have that kind of relationship with our parent to bring it up. And so you might consider, is it somebody else in the family, or bringing in that third party to come in and maybe facilitate the conversation?
Absolutely. That's such a great tip. I've also, used this myself, where it's like, okay, we're doing this as a baseline. This doesn't necessarily mean, that's anything going on, but now we have this baseline. So in the future, we can see if there are any changes. So thank you so much for that. Thank you, Lakeland and Jenny, and for Home Instead for bringing this webinar to our audience. I also just wanted to acknowledge that I know that many of you that are attending, I've read this in the comments, may be dealing with the challenges of Alzheimer's or related dementias, either personally or professionally. And so whether you're facing the loss of a loved one or working with those that are affected, your experience and your efforts are really valued. So thank you so much for the work that you do. I also want to remind you that the FAQs page has a lot of great information. It has been updated. So make sure that you check in on the FAQs page that was linked in the announcements tab for additional details on our new system. And for any further inquiries, contact ASA at info@asagene.org. You can also visit our website to register for upcoming webinars, including securing support for those who are high risk for hospital readmissions. That will take place July 10th. And we also still have webinars that are available on demand. If you haven't registered or attended those, you still have time to earn CEs. So thank you again, Lakeland and Jenny and everyone here today. We appreciate your patience during our transition and look forward to seeing you at future events. Have a great day. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.